The Vikings' homeland was Scandinavia, modern Norway, Sweden and Denmark. However, they ventured out and traveled great distances, as far as North America to the west, Russia to the east, Lapland to the north and the Mediterranean world to the south. We have information about them through archaeology, poetry, sagas, proverbs, treaties and the writings of those they encountered in Europe and Asia. In this series, we discuss some of their conquests, particularly in England, and how they were able to be so successful by being so violent. They themselves left very little written proof. In the 4th and 5th century AD, when the Romans finally withdrew from Britain, they left behind a patchwork of Brittonic and Romano-British kingdoms, dispersed across the island, just like on the mainland. However, it didn't take long for warlike individuals on the periphery to rush in and start exploiting the new imperial army's absence. Fearsome images flowed south from beyond Hadrian's Wall, Irish warriors poured in from the west, but most critically, numerous Germanic groups from across the Channel moved into the island's east. They came from modern-day Denmark and the Netherlands and were Anglo-Saxons, Jutes and Frisians, who, like their similarly warlike neighbors, the Vandals and the Goths, crossed boundaries as a Roman control waned. The Romano-British and Britons were gradually pushed to the west during the 5th, 6th and 7th century by these invading warrior cultures, which eventually merged into 7 distinct kingdoms known as the Anglo-Saxon Heptarchy: Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria, East Anglia, Kent, Sussex and Essex. These kingdoms eventually all adapted Christianity, but they did not change their aggressive natures. They continued to engage in warfare for several centuries, with one another and with their Brittonic and Pictish neighbors to the west and to the north. The Northumbrian and Mercian kingdoms, which engaged in a bloody war for power during the 7th century, were particularly noteworthy during this period. By the late 8th century, the Kingdom of Mercia in the Midlands, ruled by its king Offa, was the most powerful realm, ruling over all of the Anglo-Saxon lands south of the river Humber. However, little did the great king Offa know that in the years after his death, a terrifying new threat would arrive on the shores of Britain. Offa is famous for the large earthwork construction along the Welsh border that still stands today. A clearly warlike culture had been growing in Scandinavia over the centuries, while the Anglo-Saxons had been steadily adopting to Christianity and turning more and more to Francia and Rome for guidance. The Anglo-Saxons' ancestors had resided there since the last ice age, in the frosty fjords of Norway and the islands and archipelagos of Denmark. By the end of the 8th century, a combination of population pressure, Frankish aggression from the south and a revolution in shipbuilding techniques gradually forced people in Scandinavia to look outwards. However, unlike their Anglo-Saxon cousins, these people were still pagan and, above all, they placed importance on military power and seafaring prowess. From their homes, both peaceful tradesmen and impromptu pirate raiders started to travel west and east. Britain and Ireland, as well as Charlemagne's Francia to the south, must have appeared like logical choices to the people of Denmark and Norway. At the very end of Offa's reign, Scandinavian pirates with snarling dragon heads started to be seen off the coastlines of the islands. These resourceful Scandinavians would later be referred to as Vikings, a term that did not refer to their ethnicity but rather to their occupation as pirates. They initially concentrated on destroying Christian holy sites that tended to generate the largest financial benefits throughout the north of Britain and Ireland, much to the honor of the Christian writers of the period who were virtually mainly monks in monasteries. Soon after, significant wealth was pillaged and stolen. Nevertheless, their strategies started to shift. the more ambitious of the invaders started to overwinter in Britain, and before long, Norwegian settlers started to displace or subjugate to the native inhabitants of the Faroe Islands, Orkney, Shetland, and various regions of Ireland and Scotland. Others attacked the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, but they were typically defeated before they could do any harm or establish down. As Wessex rose under its king Egbert, a cunning leader who had received his education over the Channel in Francia, Mercia gradually lost its hegemony over the southern kingdoms in the early 9th century. Egbert was all too familiar with the Vikings and engaged them in numerous conflicts throughout his rule, most notably at Carhampton in 836, where he routed a group of invaders who seemed to be on the side of Cornwallian Britons. During his rule, he completely incorporated the lesser kingdoms of Essex, Sussex, and Kent into Essex, solidifying its position as the most powerful. When he was passed away, his son Æthelwulf took command. Æthelwulf oversaw the year's recurring invasion by Scandinavians, most notably in the 850s, when raiding parties besieged his capital at Winchester. The Scandinavians were making the most inroads during this time in Ireland and modern-day Scotland, where they established strong footholds, most notably the town of Dublin, which would remain a bastion and stronghold of the Scandinavian world for hundreds of years to come. The other kingdoms of Britain and Ireland also occasionally attacked the invaders during this time. The fourth son of Æthelwulf, named Æthelred, succeeded to the throne of Wessex in 865 with the backing of the youngest brother and heir Alfred, who would go on to become the most well-known of all Anglo-Saxons. Æthelwulf succeeded in Wessex by his son Æthelbald and Æthelbert in turn. A large armada of longships suddenly appeared off the coast of East Anglia in 865 and landed close to Thetford, making it a year that would live in infamy for decades to come. In addition to Æthelred's accession, there had never been raiding force from Scandinavia like this. Numerous ships from pirate-based spread throughout Scandinavia region were transporting an international army of Danes, Norsemen and Swedes. They had gathered from Ireland, Frisia, Francia, Scandinavia and Pictland to launch a full-scale invasion of the Anglo-Saxon country, much to the alarm of the Christian writer of the time who called it the Great Heathen Army. The effect of this onslaught can still be felt today in the DNA. Places named and very culture of Wales, Scotland and Ireland, in addition to modern-day England. In contrast to these previous organizations, Scandinavian battle bands and Britain nearly always worked independently from one another and lacked cohesiveness before the advent of the Great Army in 865. This one, though, had a number of leaders, and they all had gathered to cooperate toward the common objective of complete conquest. Ivar, Halfdan and Ubba appeared to have been the first three war chiefs to command the army. These were the sons of the famous Viking Ragnar Lodbrok. According to the Norse sagas, each was a sea monarch who might have been in charge of thousands of soldiers and countless longships. According to the sagas, they had traveled to England to get revenge on the Northumbrian king Aela for killing their father. However, it is also possible that years of raids in the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms led naturally to the invasion, the logical progression of ambitious Norse god worshippers who saw a way to establish their own kingdoms. Simply put, something drastic was going to happen. This is the whole story of Viking Britain, showing how the blood and fire built the England we know today. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Stay tuned for the next part where we talk about the Vikings conquering of England in more detail. But until then, stay safe and make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss part 2 of how the Vikings conquered England.